we have been using this method for, I don't know, 9 years. We run like 2-day course of how to do this in practice. Now we have like 10 minutes, so super quick overview of like how to do it. So first about the contents, usually you should have in your DPIA. We always have a data flow chart because it helps us to understand what we might be missing and or what is important. Then we have a like textual explanation of on top of the data flow chart, like what is happening when you start to use the Copilot. Then we do the compliance assessment. In this case, it's like for GDPR, but then we could add any framework pretty much. It could be AI Act applications for the deployer. It could be any other legal requirements pretty much. And then we do the like most crucial part, the risk assessment. But how did we do this? So we had certain like customer cases where the data protection authorities in Finland were interested about certain processing operations of certain organizations. And so we went there and helped them to produce this DPIA. And we started by going through, like Microsoft provides, in my opinion, maybe too much documentation. That's an issue. Some organizations do not provide anything, but Microsoft maybe too much. So there's a lot of links and documents that you have to kind of read in order to like understand how Copilot works. So we went everything through. We started to kind of like, we usually follow personal data, but in this case we followed the prompt, like what happens when we type the prompt and press enter, where does it end up, what's happening to the prompt before it comes back from the large language model. We had a lot of questions for Microsoft, so we contacted them that probably you should provide us with some information because otherwise we have to kind of leave certain things as like high risks or risks in the DPIA that we did not receive information and we are not sure what happens with the data. But we got lucky and they provided information to us. And based on this, we actually created it's called like a pre-made DPIA. It's available to. It's not free, unfortunately, but we have made it available to anyone interested. But the first part, we track the prompt, we track the personal data, like when you in its normal use of Copilot, what will happen, what kind of data gets collected, and where does it end up? So it's not just the Copilot itself. There are like other features surrounding, or you kind of have to use them, even though yesterday we heard about like Microsoft's presentation that there are options that you can select, but I might disagree on certain points that can you kind of select certain things or not. But first, the data flow. This helps us to understand. And then on top of that, this is just the baseline. We started to explain it, like how I would explain it to my own mother when I plug in Copilot and type the prompt, what will happen in a way that she would understand. And we created, I think it's like, I don't know, 50 pages of text explaining, like that's the systematic description of the processing operations. But what kind of data will be processed? Microsoft is quite transparent, but they have customer data, then they have the telemetry information, diagnostics information, then they have like kind of like security data that they are collecting when you are using their services, but we kind of listed all of those and started to explain that why they're being processed, where they end up, who are Microsoft's third parties who can access the data. We even went so far that we listed Microsoft's like data center, the cable providers, like in whose cable is the data flowing, because we weren't quite sure whether it's needed for the transfer impact assessment in the future, because someone could get access to the data from the cables itself. But anyway, a long explanation what will happen. We created it from the privacy point of view, so for the GDPR purposes, but also it's you don't have to do much more if you need proper documentation for AI purposes as well. For example, if you are doing a fundamental rights impact assessment, you pretty much have all it requires. You may want to just add like about the your processes where the AI system is used, and then of course it's not just the
data subjects, but other like natural persons it affects.
Can I ask, when you were going through this, because it is a kind of ubiquitous system that many organizations are using, and it is so complex. You talked even in your explanation for your mother, a 50-page explanation of what it's doing, which is, not simple. What kind of tips might you have for if others are trying to go through a similar process? Were there things that you learned? Was it really in the questioning of the supplier that you got the information? Did you really need to read all the thousands of links, or was it, could you rely on the summary and the explanation? And you talked about sort of querying the AI itself. Did you use that technique?
We didn't use AI when we created the first versions. Of course, you could use it because now the research AI models, you can just put it to research all the thousands of pages of information and provide a ready-made report for you. But unfortunately, they tend to hallucinate a lot. So you end up reading all the documents to verify whether it came up with some information and whether it's actually real. But it's all about asking questions. We didn't go to the legal team in the beginning. We discussed with information security personnel, what happens with the prompt. We discussed with their architects, like a CTO of Microsoft Finland. We had a lot of discussions with him, and yeah, that's how we kind of started. Because I don't know, in my opinion, lawyers tend to they not necessarily provide all the information because they fear that they might leak something like business secrets or something. But again, this information should be available to any organization because it's needed for the DPIA, in my opinion. But yeah, this was the first part. So now we kind of understand how Copilot works once we plug it in. And then the next part, okay, one more thing that why this is crucial. So because when we track the personal data and the prompts, we started to identify certain things that, okay, Copilot might access Microsoft Bing in certain cases. It was not in my opinion, too transparently explained in Microsoft's documentation, but once you read the correct documentation, you might identify that, okay, it's the Copilot who decides when not to use Bing, and it makes the search query, and the search query might contain content samples from your M365 data. But this is just one example why you should do this work, because otherwise you will clearly miss it and in your DPIA, and could be a huge risk, could be a smaller risk for some other organization. Another example, Microsoft feedback. Copilot tends to ask feedback from the user, but again, they might accidentally leak organizations' data to Microsoft if they are not careful enough, because the user interface, it's quite trickily designed, so it might take, again, content samples from your M365 data, and then once you identify these, then you just need to assess whether do you have a lawful basis to disclose this data to Microsoft, because for Bing and for the feedback functionality, at least the last time I checked, Microsoft still acts as a data controller, so you need to have a lawful basis to, if it's personal data, to disclose it to Microsoft. But I know that they are doing something for this both, so hopefully in the future we will see that you can actually use Copilot in a way that it accesses Bing and there is no data disclosure to Microsoft's own purposes and so forth. But of course, on top of these, there are the diagnostics information collection. So whenever you use Microsoft's products, they collect certain information. Again, you need to identify that. You need to kind of identify a lawful basis for that as well. But yeah, it starts to form. Once you read all the documentation, most of it, it's there, but you just have to put it together and then start assessing that. Can you use Copilot or not?
That's the next step.
Yeah, the next step, that's the compliance assessment part of the DPIA. So anyone can take all the GDPR applications and put them as single requirements. We have our own list of requirements that we use in DPIAs, but then we just go one by one, how is this obligation met? And of course, it's part for like Microsoft, what kind of tools or practices or processes they provide, and then what kind of, because the customer also or user has to do something, so then we just assess whether it's suitable, and of course it's up to the customer to decide whether the compliance level is enough for them or not. And this method, it enables us to kind of, we could use the DPIA framework or GDPR obligations, but then again, we could pick AI Act's deployer obligations and do the similar assessment like using the same template, so we don't have to do like 10 different assessments on the same product. And the final part is like once we understand that how Copilot works or how the AI system works, what data will be processed, what third parties, what data locations, so forth, then we understand the compliance level, what gaps there might be, the organization is not transparent enough, that's naturally a risk for the data subjects. But the final part is like a general risk assessment. And usually I remember like 2 years ago when we did the first ones of these, we usually run these risk workshops with the organization, and we tend to like start it by asking like, can you come up with any risks? And I still meet a lot of organizations like, no, like, are there any risks related to AI systems? Like, yeah, could be. But now we have again, like a template library of risks related to Copilot. Those are something that we always go through, but then because Copilot, Microsoft develops it further, there might be like new risks in the future. So we keep it kind of like up to date.
And I think that's one of the most helpful things when you do have that risk assessment in trying to then manage the risks that you identify, whether that is, for example, by use case or by training people what information to put in or not to use the feedback function or whatever it is that's right for your organization, rather than a blanket, or we've had to score everything in a way that means we can't use it. It's looking how can you manage those risks in a way that's acceptable to still be able to leverage the technology, because ultimately nobody wants to send the tool to the privacy function for a DPIA to be told they can't use it.
Yeah.
So it's sort of being an awareness and then management of that. I think we have a couple of key takeaways from you, then hopefully time for one or two questions.
So prepare your organization that even though we meet a lot of organizations where the DPIA takes roughly 5 minutes, but I would say that if a proper AI assessment is done, it takes much more than 5 minutes, so to say. So prepare your employees, because you will need your like IT architects, developers, you need to discuss with the provider, very likely, and so forth. So it usually takes days. Then the more effort you put into the first phase of the DPIA, so to describe or create the systematic description of the processing operations, the whole assessment process becomes smoother, because we find it really valuable when we run these risk workshops. When we have everything explained, we usually show the data flow map, and we explain that how the GDPR obligations actually apply and why they apply. It's somewhat like more understandable for sort of like normal people. So more you invest in that, it will be helpful. And then there are like certain AI vendors, like we saw when the GDPR came into force, not that many were like willing to disclose essential information that we needed for the compliance or risk assessments, but now the same thing is happening with AI vendors. Usually you will meet a lot of organizations claiming that, hey, we have built our own AI, but 99% of the cases it's nice user interface on top of like ChatGPT API, or it's built on Microsoft Azure, but very likely that they haven't built it or trained their own AI model. But you just have to pick the most suitable one and go with them.